Would you want to fight in the UFC if you could?
No. First of all, I'm old as fuck.
But in your prime?
If I was competing still when the UFC was around, I probably would have done something. But also, when the UFC first came around, it was like one weight class.
Yeah.
You know, when I stopped fighting was in 1989. That was the last kickboxing fight that I had. And that was, there was nothing. And there was no money in it. And I was getting headaches, too, just from sparring.
Yeah.
And I did not spar smart. I sparred meathead style.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know a lot more today than I ever did then as far as, like, consequences and what's important and how to learn better, you know, which I think is knowing how to be. I was good at being obsessed with things and really, like, just focusing on them constantly all the time. But it was more frantic and frenetic. It wasn't, like, calculated and intelligent.
It's like crashing in and learning.
Just being obsessed, just constantly training all the day. But I think that, you know, one of the things that we're learning now is the right way to learn. Like you were saying, that so many fighters are overtrained, you know, and that so many fighters spar too hard, and they, you know, a lot of, like you're saying, people think that hitting the pads and getting tired is good work.
It's tough, though, because when you have a fighter's mentality, you got to think it's easy to be outside, and I could say it because I've been in it, but when someone on the outside says, oh, these guys, you know, they need to train harder, they need to keep doing more and more and more, and when you're fighting, you're like, shit, I got to fight in 3 weeks. You never think your conditioning is good enough.
Right.
You could train every day, all day, put your best effort, and you're going to think your conditioning is good enough. You're going to be like the day before the fight, you've done everything possible in your training. You're going to go on and you're going to second guess your conditioning. You're going to wonder if you did enough. You're going to wonder, shit, I should have trained now. Why didn't my Sunday rest day? I should have been training. I should have been getting better. But really, you have to get in that mindset that, you know, you don't need more all the time. And that's why guys are getting injured. They're putting their bodies, they're not letting themselves rest, and they're getting sick. I bet you if you go on in one of your UFC shows and you ask every fighter on that card who's sick, I bet you 50% would be sick with some sort of cold or infection or sinus infection. Most of those guys are probably sick because their immune system is crashed from not eating, constantly training, stress, not sleeping. Like, I bet you more than half are sick with something.
Absolutely. I'm sure. I was always sick before Taekwondo tournaments. And
sinuses for me. Every fight I had a sinus infection, and I was even smart about my training, and I still got sinus infections. Do you think, would you be a good coach?
If I was invested in it, I would be the best coach that I could be, for sure.
Like, do you
and
think
that's one of the
like
reasons
you
why I
would
stopped
be-
teaching. I stopped teaching when I started doing stand-up comedy because I wasn't being a very good teacher anymore.
Just because you didn't put the time and the effort into it?
It
or-
wasn't where my head was at. My head was I was, you know, there was no, like I said, there was no money in fighting when I was fighting. There was nothing. And so unless you were a boxer, you weren't going to make any money.
So that was before Fear Factor?
Yeah, way before. So there was essentially no way to have a career other than teaching. And so when I started getting into stand-up comedy, I realized, like, I got talked into it by guys I used to train with. And when I started doing it, I realized, like, oh, wow, like, I could make a living doing this. Like, this is actually, there's a real path. Like, there's guys that I know that make a living doing this. Where everybody I know that's fighting is broke or they're slurring their words.
Yeah.
And, like, guys from the gym that would be in gym wars all the time, and now they're all fucked up. They don't want to know where they parked their car. There was a lot of that shit that was scaring the fuck out of me. So when I started getting into comedy, I quit teaching. And I suffered financially because of it, but I would rather do that at the time. My mind was, I would rather suffer financially than give anybody a half-assed coaching job.
Yeah.
You know, so coaching MMA, I think, is one of the most difficult things in all sports. You know, I'm sure coaching kickboxing is probably very, very similar in that regard, in that you're so invested in your students. There's so much on the line.
You have to be.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so, you know, there's nothing you can do. You can train them as much as you can, but you got to let them go when they get into that ring or get into that cage, and, like, you know, and hope that it all comes together.
But the other problem I find with MMA is a lot of coaches. There's too many coaches, I find. You have A lot of these guys have a boxing coach that's telling them to box a certain way. Then all of a sudden they're going, hey, I got to do Muay Thai now. So they have a Muay Thai coach is now telling them to do Muay Thai this way. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, hey, we got to do spinning shit. So let's do it here. So now all of a sudden you have 3 different coaches all telling you to do different things.
Yeah.
So now this poor fighter is going to go to the ring. Yeah, you might know everything from all of them, but what are you going to do? You're going to get confused. That's where, again, basics are important. That's why I don't think you should overcomplicate shit. So I know if you're going to jab, I know how I'm going to do it. I don't have time to sit there and be like, okay, I know I can parry. I know I can slip. I know I can time with the low kick. You have to know.
Right.
And I think with too many coaches are complicating shit for these guys, where they think they have to hit all of these things, so they're going to all these different coaches, and it's way overcomplicated. So who do you listen to? How do you listen to? Which way is the right way? Which one's the wrong way? My boxing coach is telling me to turn my heel out. My kickboxing coach is telling me to keep my front foot pointing forward. Which is the right way?
It's a good point, and I think that's where guys like Matt Hume, guys like Firas Zahavi, that's why they're so important, because they're overall MMA coaches. And also I think what's really important about guys like Matt and Firas is that both of those guys are highly accomplished martial artists in all disciplines. So they really know how to put it all together. Like Firas is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, he's an outstanding striker, so he knows how to combine all those things together. I think that's so critical.
Greg Jackson was probably the same way.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, there's maybe a dozen of them on the planet, and that's a problem. If you're not near any of those and you start out with someone and then that coach becomes like a mentor figure to you, and then you realize, oh, my coach is kind of limited in a lot of ways. It's very difficult to separate yourself from someone.
It's hard to see that.
Yes.
And it's kind of, you can't be a fighter who you put all your trust into this man to help you out, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, he's lacking things.
Yeah.